Hello everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and today we're looking at efficient kits. We'll be going through 3 broad loadouts from super budget to moderate low tier and finally early game kitted, scaling up each time to show you what really matters when prepping for a raid. A ton of people wanted me to make this video again for this wipe, but just remember there are no hard and fast rules. These are just my ideas, and hopefully this video gets you thinking a bit more about your loadouts and things that you might be able to change, but don't necessarily copy exactly what I've done because it's going to depend on your situation, the guns you like, your playstyle and what quests you've got. Okay, so we're going to start here completely blank, totally blank canvas right from the beginning. The first thing that I would say is that use these. These little buttons here are new for this wipe and they're very, very useful. They allow you to search, you can see all the stuff that's hidden away in bags and various places. You can even write into here if you want to. So if you want to go headwear and you're trying to find the SSH helmet, you can even just filter for that. There's also 2 different views here, which is the list view or the icon view. I prefer the icon view, but we'll see what happens later in the wipe when there's loads more guns and stuff. I don't know, we'll have to see. Anyway, use this. It's really, really quick to kit up. Obviously, if something's right here, you could just equip it, but sometimes I find that this is better if there's lots of things embedded within cases and that kind of thing. So first up, we're going to be talking about budget kits. So this is specifically really low tier guns. In this particular instance, we're going to be talking about shotguns. I know this one is probably slightly higher spec than most people's, but for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really matter. This could just be a default basic shotgun. Other weapons that would work in here are things like the SKS, the basic one from Prapor, or something like the Mosin. And we're going to focus on those guns because you actually load rounds directly from your pockets. So we'll put some buckshot in here. It doesn't really matter what it is, and this is going to fill our first little slot. So now that we've got our gun, we're going to think about face covers. We always need to have one of these. I tend to just buy the cheap one and then I upgrade it in raid because scavs often have them on. This just stops your face from looking really, really shiny and bright, and it helps you if you're in bushes especially. Some maps this doesn't really matter, like if you're on factory, but you're kind of giving your opponent a target to shoot at. You know, you kind of blend in with the rest of the stuff. Your head might be behind, you know, there might be a sign behind you or a piece of particular map design that makes it really difficult to actually figure out where your head is versus the rest of your body. It's surprising, especially with all the blur and stuff that goes on in Tarkov fights. You want to obscure yourself as much as possible. So with that, the next most important piece of kit, I think, is the earpiece. The earpiece is so important in Tarkov. It's actually become more important in this wipe, actually halfway through last wipe, because previously it was more like an EQ depending on which headset you used. Some headsets were more tinny, some headsets were more bassy, and it also depends upon your own personal headphones that you're using in real life as well as to what you might prefer. But halfway through last wipe, they redid the way the headsets work, and now they have different distances for them. If you're wearing a headset, you're going to be able to hear so much further than somebody who doesn't have one on. So I recommend the GSSHs. You can buy these at level 1. I know some people find them a little bit too tinny and a bit crackly and they don't really like them, but you'll be able to hear for miles away from somebody else who isn't wearing one. I think it's absolutely imperative that you wear one of these. They're so cheap. From Prapor, you can get them for 17,500 rubles, and in my opinion, they're actually more important than body armor. Speaking of body armor, some people do forgo this when they're going with really, really low tier kits. The reason why I don't like to do this is because your thorax is completely uncovered, and you can get killed with so many low level rounds that you can block with even the cheap body armors, things like 762 by 39 HP that comes out of Scav SKSs, buckshots exactly like what we're using. 2 of these, if they touch your thorax, you'll basically die. It's very, very dangerous to not go with anything covering your thorax. So if we go and have a look at Ragman and go and see what he has to offer at level 1, there's not a great deal of choice particularly, but you can choose a couple of different armors. These ones are a bit expensive for a super budget run, I think, but you know, you can go for class 3 if you want. But the 2 main contenders are the Packer and the 6B2. Now with the 6B2 very slightly cheaper, I think this is probably the better one, and it's slightly more camoed. The Packer is technically more protective at class 2, but with class 2s, they're either going to protect you or they aren't. And the effective durability of both of these is actually super high compared to other armors, so I don't think it matters all that much. Also, the Packer can be used in other things, so you can craft the Packer into stuff. So people might actually take the Packer over the 6B2, which is basically just a useless piece of armor. It's just wasted. It's terrible value for slot. You can't use it for anything else. So maybe you can find something on fence that's usable and very slightly cheaper occasionally. But I think just looking on Ragman, buying this guy, that will set you in good stead and stop you dying to stupid stuff. Obviously, there's lots of things that will still kill you, but it stops you dying to stupid stuff in one single shot. So this loadout is actually kind of good to go. You could go into raid with this and do just fine, as long as you don't get hit too much. So obviously the thing that we're missing here is meds. Now, meds solves a couple of problems. We've got to fix actual HP damage. We've got to fix light bleeds, we have to fix heavy bleeds, and then we have to do something about black limbs and fractures. So fractures themselves can be kind of ignored using painkillers, at least partly, but what we're trying to avoid is the situation where you have a break or your legs get blacked and then you can't walk anymore. You either need a way to fix the problem, a CMS kit to fix black limbs, or splints to fix the fractured limbs, or painkillers to avoid the issue entirely. Now, painkillers are complicated these days because they make your screen blurry, as of this particular wipe, and they also hit your hydration and or food, depending on exactly which one you get. So I think the basic minimal kit that you can probably get away with and also still be kind of okay, and this is where the rest of the pockets and bags goes alongside the secure container. These two things work in conjunction. Is an AI2. This is the cheapest kit that you can get. You can buy this from Therapist straight away. A cat tourniquet. This comes from Peacekeeper. This is actually faster than the S-March. If we go to have a look at Therapist and to S-March tourniquet, this is usually the basic one you find on the scavs. It costs 4,000 rubles and its use time is 5 seconds. So it's actually longer if you go to Peacekeeper and we go to here's a cat tourniquet. This is $27. This is actually about the same price, if not slightly cheaper. And this has a 3-second use time as well, which is the same as the more advanced hemostat that you can buy later on. This is also 3 seconds. So the cat matches this, but is obviously about a third of the price. So using this, we bind these using my med bind, hold down 5 and then let go of 5. That's what I use for this. So now we're going to get a heavy bleed. We're going to use the cat first. We have just actual damage. We're going to use the AI2 first. That's the way I have this set up. You can go and watch my hotkeys guide to figure that out. There's a whole load of stuff in there as well, so do watch that if you don't know how to do this. Next, we're going to bring in actual bandage because cat tourniquets, this is something people have suggested before, is that the cat tourniquets should heal light bleeds as well, but with maybe some disadvantage to limb HP, something along those lines. But these two things just don't work the same at the moment. Bandages heal lights, cats heal heavies, and that's just the way it is. You need both to be able to heal both status effects. Outside of this, we still need a way to fix black limbs. We don't have a painkiller or any splints. In the secure container, if you only have the alpha, you'll have a 2x2. I like to put the CMS in here, an alu splint in here, and then maybe bullets in here. Now, we don't have any painkillers in this loadout. This is like the cheapest, most budget loadout that you can basically get away with. And what we're saying here is that we don't need painkillers because if we get into a situation where we're damaged, we're probably going to die anyway if we get our legs blacked or something like that. But if we do manage to survive and finish and escape, then we can use the CMS and we can use the splint to fix the stuff that needs to be fixed so we can escape from the raid. It's up to you as to exactly how you want to do this. Not everybody has access to CMS. You get a couple when you first start. You might not actually have any CMSs straight away. So you're better off potentially bringing in your longest term painkillers possible and maybe a splint. So yeah, you can still fix breaks if they occur. You can't fix any black limbs anymore, but you do still have the ability to use painkillers to get yourself to the extract. There is nothing worse than limping through the entire map. I've done it a million times. You forget to bring one particular piece of the equipment and you can't fix it, especially when you're playing hardcore, which I was last wipe. So I felt the harsh end of this. It's really important to have either CMS plus splint or painkillers of some description. That's really the bare minimum, because otherwise you are going to find yourself stuck in some raids where you can't leave, or it's really hard to leave, and you just have to hobble all the way to the extract, and it is super painful. If you don't even have an alu splint, then yes, you can just put a regular splint in here, and then I would advise taking probably the biggest med kit that you can, something like the IFAK, and then we're going to use the final slot just for some extra bullets, because we may not have enough just in our pockets here, especially if we get into a couple of fights. I mean, you're probably looking to upgrade if you've got this kit, so maybe it'll be okay, but you might want an extra stack here. Kind of depends on what you want to put in. So as we said here, this kit, the low tier, most budget possible kit that you can go into raid with and still have a decent chance of surviving, is primarily revolves around shotguns, around the Mosin, and around the SKS, because this allows you to have a single stack of bullets here and not be worried about magazines. This setup technically doesn't really even work with pistols, because a pistol needs a magazine to be able to swap in and out, and you're going to have to move something else like a bandage or whatever. You need a spare slot to have an extra pistol mag, so you need another slot here because you'll have one in the gun, one in the rig, and then you need a spare slot for it to swap into, because in Tarkov there is no switching into empty spaces because it's quite primitive in that particular sense. And so we're going to have to upgrade to a different rig. So just before we move on to the medium tier kit, let's go and have a look at Ragman, because there's quite a lot of rigs that he has accessible at level 1. If you are really on the budget and you really want the tightest budget possible, you could go for this new version here, this M4 RSCR, which is the Zulu nylon gear. This has 3 slots of 2x1. This is the minimum. This is like 9k. So the cheapest possible rig that you can get from him. It's so close in price to the other ones that you maybe almost it's worthwhile. But this would allow you to then run on your character. You'd be able to run pistols. You'd be able to run one magazine. Say you've got an SKS, you could run 2 20-rounder magazines if you wanted to. So you could swap them out because you've got enough space for some other things. Anyway, so that kind of leads us away from the budget onto something a little bit more meaningful, like a medium tier kit. And in fact, actually, let's just change over our weapons first. So what we might want to do, let's build something around the Prapor 2's SVT. It doesn't really matter what this is. Something with a basic magazine where we might want to have a little bit more space. So the choices are, in the past, I have actually focused on the bank robber. This used to be one of my favorite rigs, but They actually changed the prices of some of these, so they're all very, very close now. We have a couple of different options. We have the Wartech TV109, and this one, if we just open it up, we can see it has a 2x2, which is why quite a lot of people like it. The Bank Robber is only 8 slots in total, whereas the Wartech is 10, and this thing costs basically the same price. Like, we're talking 500 rubles. It's almost identical. The CSA is actually one of my new favorites. I don't always necessarily like the 2x2 that much, and these two are the same, but the difference that you can probably spot between the Wartech and the CSA is actually smaller. So if you get a different rig in raids, even if you find, say, a TV 109, you're not going to lose anything by moving your CSA over for your actual main chest rig if you're wearing a piece of armor. But what you can do is you can put the CSA chest rig into your bag, and what that does is it means that you're only taking up 6 slots, but you actually get 10 out of it. The CSA is pretty efficient for that. It's even useful in the stash, actually, if you're running out of space, because you get 10 for 6, which is decent. Again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this M4 RSCR because it's just 1 for 1. And the Chicom, I don't really like at all. And this is probably the most expensive rig out of all of them, 12,500. And it only has these 2x1s. And so this limits you later on when you're looking at kind of intermediate tier kits. If you have a car kit in here, you can only have one magazine and you can't swap between the others because of these 4 1x1s. So I don't really like the Chicom. I think it's up to you. If you need the 2x2, then that's great. If you want to store something in there, if you're looting motors or whatever. If you don't need that, then I think the CSA is slightly more efficient because of the way that you can pack it back into your bag and you can amplify the space and bring the things with you, and you can upgrade your rig to something else while you do so and make more space for it. So that's pretty cool. So I like the CSA. It's the one that I think we should be using. So let's pop that on for now. And let's move on to bags. So bags over at Ragman, again, we'll just switch over to him and look at these. There's not a great deal of choice. At level 1, you have pretty much the Burkett and the MBSS. Sometimes the Hazard 4 can be okay for a pack of tea. Normally you need to get to the flea first for this before you can get it consistently. You can, in theory, bring a sling bag if you want, if you're looting safes or something, just so you've got a little bit of space, just in case you find something. But usually I would either go for the MBSS, which is really cheap at 12k, and actually it's decent space. Like, this is fine. It's only 1 row less than the Burkett, although I do like the Burkett the most. I tend to go into raid with these the most. You do find things like Scav Backpacks, Burketts, the other version, the Day Pack. And so what I recommend is people just to start creating your bag stack. So we've got our stack here. I've got a Pilgrim here, which I'm waiting to hand in later. Beta 2 that I got off somebody. And then I've got a bunch of Burketts, some Day Packs. I've probably got some Scav BPs in here and a couple of MBSSs. One cool trick about the new inventory is that using the Backpacks drop-down menu, these basically are in the order that they are in your bag stack. As long as you only have one bag stack and they're all arranged in a line, like mine are. The last one in the list shows you the last one of that type in the bag stack. So it doesn't necessarily show you the full order of the bags, because if you have, say, a Day Pack and then a Burkett and then a Day Pack and then a Burkett, it won't show you that here, because this orders them by type. But what it does is this is the last Day Pack in the stack, this is the last Burkett in the stack. So if we're picking, say, an MBSS, we could just click this one. This is right at the bottom, and because this is the smallest bag that I have, I know it's going to be the last one. That's fine. So as we go back through our bag stack, I can pop this back in, and I can also show you what happens if you want to pick something out from the center. So again, we'll go back to bags. If we want to use a Burkett instead, we'll click this one. This is the last one, and we should see an MBSS inside this, which is there, and some knives because I'm holding those for a later quest. We'll go back through the bag stack. We'll transfer these back through. So in some ways, it sort of makes sense not to even hold MBSSs, actually, using this functionality, because that means you can always just use a bag that is 4x5, which is good. The one big advantage about the 4x5 bags is you can pretty much carry everything. There's some guns that won't fit in there that are too long, maybe like the 153, that won't fit in there because it's too big, but all actual loot items will fit in here. Weapons cases will fit in here, so there's the secure weapons cases that you have to open out of raid that came from the event last wipe. They will fit in the Burkett, so will tank batteries. So if you bring this, other than certain guns, you can pretty much fit everything inside your backpack. If you bring an MBSS, that might not be the case. You might find a tank battery, and then you have to run around killing scavs to try to find a scav BP to get something of this size so that you can actually fit that into your bag. Also, same with these secured weapon cases. So you know you're safer with the Burkett, even though it is a little bit more expensive. Helmets. Now that we're moving up a little bit, I think we should probably use a helmet. We have two main choices. We have the SSH-68, the classic peen helmet, as people call it. It's just like a big dome on your head. Or the 6B47. For the time being, because we're still in the cheap intermediary level, we're going to go with the SSH-68 steel. What is the difference between these two? Actually, less than they used to be. The ergonomics decrease on the SSH-68 used to be massive, but with the decreases that they brought through, the turn speed and ergo are actually very similar now. So the main difference between these two is top and nape only for this, whereas for the Ratnik, it's top, nape, and ears. So you get ears protection. If you get shot in the ears with a shotgun or something, this will protect you, and this won't. But it's a very fringe marginal benefit. So if you're running a cheap gun and a cheap kit, I think the SSH-68 is fine. You'll also get this a bunch back in insurance. People do worry about insurance these days because of scavs picking up stuff, but if you go and look at my insurance from the other day, I actually have loads of even these 6P47 Ratniks. Some of this is me doing insurance fraud and swapping in raid, but it's fine. I get tons of these back. I don't think you should worry too much about the scavs. I think it's still worth insuring these things. So moving on to armor, we probably don't want to be using class 2 now if we're not using the actual cheapest loadout that we possibly can. And given that we're not anymore, let's go and have a look at the armor that is available. Especially at level 1, we now have this new one, which I talked about previously, the Korakulon. This is good because it allows you to be flexible and still use those rigs that we talked about before. You can go and use this guy, the 86 Ulate, which is the class 3 version in tan. This one has got not a terrible inside space, it's okay, and it costs 10,000 rubles more, which is, well, 8,000 actually, which is fair enough given that it comes with a relatively decent rig. This thing is quite hard to insurance fraud in raid though. You need to find an armor and rig pair together to insurance fraud it. Whereas if you've got the Korakulon, for example, and a normal chest rig at the same time, you can get rid of this and upgrade it, you can get rid of this and upgrade it. So I actually think to be more flexible, I think you're probably better off keeping this. Also, it's less chance of people taking it. It's very difficult for people to take this because they are quite heavy and they don't have a great deal of space, but they do have space inside. So you can stick these in a bag and then put stuff in the rig as a storage. So the Korakulon kind of saves you from that a little bit. So we're going to use that for now, and we're going to keep on our CSA. The other option here is from the traders again, from Prapor this time. We're going to go to him and look at what is good. It's an actual main piece of armor. It's this one, the 6B23 for propane. This usually gets better once you've got the access to the flea market, because if we go and filter and have a look at this only costs 36k. And this comes down all the way down to something like high 20s, 28, something like that. I was buying these earlier because I actually bought a Red Rebel today, so I did see the prices under 30k for these, which was pretty cool. So you can get a class 3 really cheaply for that. It's actually cheaper than the Korakulon, so it's an option if you want to be able to do that. But Korakulon, if nothing else is available, you don't have propane, or you're not at the flea, this is probably the best bet. Right, headsets, still as important as ever, but the slightly more expensive version from the GSSH is the M32s. You can't use the M32s with the SSH steel helmet. You have to have the Ratnik. So if you want to upgrade to this headset, this is the one that is on Skier. It's on Skier 1. There's actually some being sold cheaper than him. But if you go over to Skier and look at actual gear, you can see it's at 27,700 rubles. The M32 is available from him. I really like this. I think this is better than the GSSH. I think it's got a longer range as well. The GSSH is very entry level, and it does allow you to wear a helmet with this, with the 6P47, but you have to use this Ratnik. You can't use the SSH. You could only use the SSH if you're wearing the GSSHs, which is kind of interesting. So this is like the super budget pairing, and then if you want to move up in the world, then you can use this instead, the Ratnik plus the M32s. The 6B47 Ratnik is purchasable from Prapor for quite a bit more, actually, 33,000, but you can also do the barter for 2 bleaches with Ragman. These often are just the same price. Right now, they're actually pretty good, and I might even buy some right while we're recording this video, because I do use Ratniks all the time. But often these things are costing around here, 15, 16k, and it ends up making it just not really worthwhile. I'm going to be using this for quite a while, actually, the M32s and the 6P47, until I start upgrading to the tier 4 helmets a little bit later on in this wipe. Okay, so now we need to get our meds ready for this particular set of weapons. Obviously, we're going to have a magazine for this gun, maybe 2, something like that, depending on what we've got. Even if we've got a 2x2 that'll fill this slot, we have ample space for other things. We're going to go back to the classic loadout that I usually run, which is my favorite one, which is the car and cat combination. So the car kit here, and then we've got a cat tourniquet there and a cat tourniquet here. These I normally just stick into my pockets. We can pop the car kit up into here, and I'm going to use my same hotkey again, hold down on 5, let go of 5. So now with the car kit, this is even more powerful. We have heavy bleeding stopped on press. We then have a light bleed stopped on release if there's a light bleed there, and if there's not a bleed at all, then we're going to heal actual HP using the car. This covers you from pretty much everything. We then can also bring probably an analgin painkiller. You don't have to do that now, but I think it is quite useful to bring analgin painkillers. I'm not even sure if I have any more. I think I got rid of them. I don't actually use them now. Put them in there. Now, analgins are not necessarily the worst thing in the world these days. Because of the painkiller effect blur, it's become sort of meta to use something with a very short time period on it. This does destroy your hydration, but it only removes pain for 80 seconds. So once the fight is over, you get 1 minute and 20 seconds of painkiller relief. So if you've got black legs or broken legs or whatever, you can run around just fine. Yes, you have the blur around the edge, but you would have probably from the pain anyway, from the fractures and the status effects that you've received on your character. And then after 1 minute 20, it goes away again so that you can carry on your day like normal. If you use something like an ibuprofen, which I have here, this lasts for like 280 seconds, which is a hell of a lot longer. And the fight might be over and you're moving on to your next thing, but your screen is still blurry and desaturated and all of that kind of stuff that's come with the new painkiller effect. So I actually don't think it's a terrible idea to take analgens, especially these days. So we're going to look back at the secure container again for the last section. We want to be able to fix black limbs, so we're going to take a CMS, we're going to take an alu splint if we can, and then probably a stack of bullets as well. This guy uses 762 by 54R, so we're just going to take a stack of LPSs, and that's what it would look like if I was setting this up with my secure container and I only had an alpha. But you can also choose to maybe move the alu splint out, put a regular splint in your pocket, and use a long-term painkiller in here instead. They kind of do the same thing broadly, which is allowing you to move. You won't be able to fix your fracture, so you will need to get out of the raid if you're using these painkillers, but this might give you a little bit more flexibility. It depends on kind of what you want to do. I prefer being able to fix everything and not having as much painkiller, but some people prefer the other way around, so it just depends on your personal preferences. Now, obviously with the gamma, you can scale up quite a bit because you have these extra slots. I usually go CMS in the bottom, alu splint in here. If you have a docs case, you can use that and pop that in alongside the long-term painkillers. I was not running the docs case for ages at the beginning of this wipe. I was running the Gingy keychain, which can be used to hold 4 keys, which is enough for the early game quest because you're cycling them in and out all the time, going to different rooms. And also a Willer's wallet. You can use a regular wallet so you can hold cash, euros, and dollars without taking up multiple spaces, and you get to save that when you die. So I was using the combination of those two things at the beginning. The docs case is clearly better, and I did the barter for that recently. This is what I would use normally, but you can use those other two if you are starting out and you don't want to afford it just yet. From here, we can bring 2 stacks of bullets now, which is my general preference. It depends what. With the SVT-40, you might not need this. With, say, 2 magazines and 1 stack, you probably are going to be okay. But 2 stacks is my general preference for regular kits. And if you're using just the car, sometimes, occasionally, you can run out of meds, which is why it can be useful to bring an IFAK or an AFAK or something big that's single slot, basically those two. Whichever is your biggest health kit that you've got, bring that as well, just in case. You won't use it in 95% of raids. Very occasionally, you'll run out of health because you've had to heal like 2 light bleeds using this, for example, because we don't have an actual light bleed item, and you're going to run out of HP on the car kit. So this just saves you in those rare cases where you do run out. It happens, but it's quite infrequent. I would say that the weakest part about this kit is probably the class 3. The class 3 armor here is going to let in so much stuff. With the helmet, it's less so because it's very difficult to protect your head anyway. Half the time you're going to get shot in the face and the eyes, and you'll get this thing back a lot. But the class 3 thorax protection is actually quite important to upgrade as soon as you can. You do find class 4s on scavs, so I would recommend this loadout because you can swap this out for, say, a 6p13, which you do find on scavs fairly readily. This is class 4. It's bad, but it's better than having class 3. This will stop an M856A1 bullet or a PP bullet from 545 AKs 50% of the time on the first shot. The class 3 armor will not do that. This will also fare better against shotguns and other low-level ammo as well, because they do less damage to the higher classes the higher you go and the lower the pen is. There's a relative ratio there where bullets actually do different amounts of durability damage to different classes. So you're still better off having the better class, even if the durability is quite low. So find one of these in raid if you can't just go and get one at this point in time from Ragman or the fleet or whatever. Until then, maybe use the class 3, but I think getting to class 4 thorax armor is really, really important. So now we're moving up to a more kitted version of kind of the early wipe. And what we're going to do here is use a kit that I have used a lot. This is like a Peacekeeper 2 level kit, and we're talking probably about flea market access as well and Ragman level 2. But we're going to be looking at the G36, which I've been running a lot. I've been running this gun a ton. You can buy this stuff either for Peacekeeper 2 or the flea market. I did a whole video about this. It costs probably 130k to put together. This is replaceable with, say, the MDR. You could put in here the Scar instead. You could put the AK-74UN, for example. All of those kits will work and are kind of in the philosophy of this final kit that we're going to put together. So we're going to start looking at rigs again. The CSA is good, but it is slightly limited in its scope. I have a different rig that I use once I get to Jaeger 2, which isn't the CSA, which is good for budget, which is the Tarzan. We go over and have a look at Jaeger. At Jaeger 2, there is an absolutely cracking barter that makes me use the Tarzan pretty much all wipe, which is the hunting matches. If you go and look at hunting matches, they're almost always really, really cheap. This is actually quite expensive hunting matches, but even if you go and use the hunting matches and you buy them and you do this barter with them, you are buying this Tarzan rig for cheaper than the CSA rig. And look at the space difference. It's absolutely huge. Yes, you don't get the bag stacking benefit that you do with the CSA, but you can carry a lot more stuff. The Splav Tarzan has 14 slots, whereas the CSA chest rig only has 10. And what's more, you could actually technically sell this and make a profit. You go to Ragman, you can sell this for 12,000 rubles. So it just shows you kind of the value of this for getting it for 10 or lower. I normally buy my hunting badges at like 7 or 8k. It's a complete no-brainer, and we can just stick our car kit in it, and we can also have 2 magazines for the G36. No problem in that. We've got an extra space available. So let's go and grab, I think we've probably got some in our insurance. So I'm going to go and put 2 G36 magazines in here, just like so. If you really do want more space than this, and I know some people do because they bring lots of grenades or other stuff, or they just want to maximize their looting, what I would advise you to do is look through the tactical rigs and scroll down. You probably have to get to about 20k to get something better. Now, the direct action Thunderbolt is not bad. This is very light, has 2 more slots, 0.6 kilos. It's one of the lightest rigs in the game that's actually of a decent size, so that's not a bad idea. Same thing with the Triton, that's 16 as well. A bit heavier, but not too bad. Same thing with the Umka, that's also 16 slots and not too bad. But if you get to yourself to around the 20k mark, you'll start to see ones that are a little bit bigger, like the 18 of this one, the Profi chest rig. This is not too bad. The one that's a usual staple that you find on scavs a lot, and the one that you should probably look out for all the time, is the Azimuth. Now, I don't see any here right away, but you should just scroll through and see if you can find any like this one. So the Azimuth is huge. The Azimuth has 20 slots. It's all 2x1s, so it's pretty nice. There is no 2x2, which is slightly unfortunate, but the Azimuth is really good. Same with the Wartech rig here. This is also 20 slots. There's more 1x1s in this, 2 of them here, but this is also really, really decent. If you want loads of space, these guys are probably the way to go. Either the Wartech Mark III TV104 or the Azimuth. There's 2 types of the Azimuth, one in Serpat and the other one in black, I believe. So you want to go for those if you want something a bit bigger, but I just usually stick with the Tarzan. I think it's fine. And if you do find one of those in raid, you can upgrade from the Tarzan to those and insurance for your Tarzan and get it back. That's what I've done previously. And as you can see, you get Tarzans back relatively frequently. I've been upgrading, and you're kind of like making money by cycling there. Now, helmets and ears, we already upgraded to the Ratnik. I think you should bring the Ratnik every single time. At this point, you can buy bleaches cheap and do the Ratnik barter for every single raid. You'll get it back fairly frequently. You can use the M32 headset, which is my favorite. Headsets are kind of funny when you get a little bit higher up. There's not really that many that you can actually buy from the traders. It's pretty weird. You can only get, say, the GSSH, the M32s, which I've been buying, and then the Contact 2s, which pretty much everybody who liked Contact 2s before doesn't like Contact 2s anymore, and most people are now just using the M32s. There are a few barters. You can get the Sword-ins for a Veritas pick. There's another Contact 2 barter for 3 sets of matches, but broadly speaking, no one really is buying anything other than some of these basic ones these days. I don't know anybody using the Contact 2s, actually. You can get like the tac sports from the Flea for like 20k, something like that. And the ones that are really good and the ones that I like, I mean, again, it's personal preference, but the ones that I like that are slightly higher up in the list are the XLs, which are about 40,000. And then obviously the Contact 4 is by far the best. This has the longest hearing range out of all the headsets when people have tested it. There's a reason why it's 70k. Late wipe, these go to about 200,000 rubles. Whether it's worth it or not sure. They have a really long hearing range, and the ambient noise is very, very, very minimal. So you can barely hear the wind and all the other stuff that you hear in Tarkov. It does actually give you a massive advantage. It might be worth investing if you're going really, really kitted or you're doing a very important raid. For now, we're just going to stick with the M32s for ease. Right, next let's talk about armor. So as I said, class 4 is really important until you get to Prapor 3, which is the current barter. You're basically going to be running class 4 for most of the early period of the wipe once you've got a few trader levels. I don't mind really which ones I use. I quite like using these just because it allows me to use a separate rig, but most of the alternatives don't allow you to use a separate rig like the Tarzan, like we have been looking at. So if we go to Bragman 2, which is really where this starts to get more interesting, these are pretty expensive if you're not getting them from scavs. Yes, you can get them on the flea market. Yes, they're cheaper usually. They're actually not right now. And you have to repair them. They won't repair well. Like this one probably won't go above 41 when you repair it. So there are a few other good options from Ragman himself. So we've got the Rat Rig, which is 70k. These were pushed up in price maybe 2 wipes ago. And so class 4 is kind of default price is about 70,000 rubles roughly. This is not too bad on space. It's actually decent. It's got 4 2x1s and it's got 4 1x1s, which is fine. The other alternative that I like is from Jaeger. This thing actually can be really cheap and can be less than 50k at times, which is the soap and toilet paper barter for this. It's a heavy beast, so you have to kind of watch your weight on this thing, and you don't get as much space as you do with the Rat Rig, but it is also class 4. It's a throwaway armor, it's ceramic, it doesn't repair well. The Rat Rig repairs a lot better than this thing does, but if you just want something to go into raid and not die to stuff that's rated against class 3 with a 100% pen chance, or near enough, then the Yule can also be an option. Another one to look out for that I do like is a barter here, which is the MMAC rig. You can get these for about 70 to 80k. You have to pick your price at the right time. So you have to get your sewing kits cheap, about 25,000 rubles. You have to get your ripstops cheap, about 15,000 rubles if you can. That takes you to 40. And then you've got whiskies as well, which if you've got like 30k, then that ends up getting you about 70,000 rubles, which is the same as the rat rig. And I think it's pretty good because the MMAC actually has a really nice internal space on it. Pretty good in comparison to the others. You got 14 spaces on that rather than on the rat rig. You've only got 12. And it's also 3x3, which allows you to min-max a space if you find something better into your own bag as well, because you've got 14 spaces, but only 9 taken up by the actual rig. Does mean that this gets taken more often though, because people use it to min-max into their own kit. So if you're worried about insurance and people taking it and dying a lot, the rat rig is probably the most likely one that's not going to get taken. I've been using these recently, and if you look in my insurance, I've got various 6B5s and various rat rigs coming back in insurance as well as these armors as well, the ceramics. So you can kind of see what I've been using just based on the insurance that I've got here. So with that said, and the loadout set, we'll swap this over to the rat rig, for example, or the Ulay. Let's just get rid of this guy. Swap this over to the Ulay just for the purposes of this discussion. We now have to think about meds again. So this is the setup that we had from the budget kit. We've got the cat and car combo, which is fine with the Analgin painkillers. If you're playing on streets or a map with a really long timer, you expect to be there for a long time, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to go and get Salewas for those maps. Streets takes nearly an hour to complete. You get into lots of scav fights, especially now that they've increased the scav spawns, and there's no harm in taking a hemostat and a Salewa if you think you're going to be there for a long time. It also kind of helps. You could get rid of this if you were taking the Salewa. Maybe you could take this as well if you want to be extra prudent. But on streets, I am leaning towards the Salewa just because it's so long. Other maps, cat and car with maybe some extras in here is completely fine. But before we've got the injector case, which is another crutch for making sure that you get through those sticky moments, because you've got maybe Propitols in there or ETGs to sort of fill that gap where the car kit sort of fails. On those big long maps, you might be better off with a Salewa actually. So just bear that in mind. The other thing, if you want to upgrade from the Analgins, I've actually been using Adrenaline. This is under the same theory as the Analgins. The Adrenaline effect only lasts for 60 seconds. You stick it in you in the fight, you do the fight, you get 60 HP, so you get 15 seconds of +4, so that's 60 total. You get 60 HP regen while it's on, and then after a minute, it's gone. So you're not having the effect lasting for hours and hours and hours. Prepaid meta has been really hurt actually by the way that BSG has changed these painkillers. So I think Adrenaline is actually decent, and I'm using this at the moment. It's one to consider. I'm trying it out. Still not sure exactly where I feel about it versus something like a Propitol, but at the moment it seems to be working, so we're going to keep doing that for now. Also, now that we're going a bit more assault, you might also want to pick a grenade. It doesn't really matter what. I've been using these VOG 17s because you can trade these for a fuse. So rather than buying them at 18k, you can normally get them for about 8,000 rubles on the fleet, which is about the same price as the others. And they have a slightly shorter fuse than the regular grenades at 3 seconds rather than 3.5, which I think maybe just helps a little bit to put fear into people. So that kind of like makes your kit pretty much complete. Using this, we can pretty much deal with every situation. We have enough space to loot a reasonable amount of stuff. Obviously, we'd change over our ammo to 2 sets of things here. With the G36, I'd probably have either M856A1, M855, or 5501 or 5601, depending on whether I've got to Peacekeeper 2 or Peacekeeper 3 and what I've unlocked. We can carry all the stuff that we need. We can fix any status effects that we need to, and we're actually pretty fearsome in combat whilst having some decent protection. So I think this is pretty much like my default of where we're getting to. One other thing I think is very useful to do is having a default start loadout. So what I've done is I've saved myself a preset, and this actually saves all the keys as well. You only really need one docs case anymore. You can save a different preset for every single map. So you can save a shoreline preset with the shoreline keys in there. You can save a lighthouse preset with the lighthouse keys in there, etc, etc. And you can also put cache in for the maps with cars and things like that. So what I'm going to do, I haven't actually done this yet, so I've just got a default kit right now, which is this one. So I've got M32's a balaclava, the Red Rebel on, just because I may as well, the Tarzan, and then in the pouches, we've got the cat and the car, and Adrenaline, and then the Gamma, which is set up exactly like you just saw it. If we open it up, it's just got a factory thing in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a default start kit for each map. I'm going to have one for each individual one. The ones that have got car extracts on it, I'm going to make sure I take the money with me in the Gamma. Maybe I just do it for every single map. I don't know yet. I'm going to have a Red Rebel on the ones, and I'll put paracord in my secure container for those that have got a Red Rebel extract, things like that. But with this, you can basically just do equip, and that gets you to this starting loadout. And from here, we can then look through. It doesn't really work very well with guns at the moment, but because there's a preset builder for guns themselves, once you've saved those, it's really no hardship. So we could just stick this in, stick some armor on, find a helmet, and using this, it's now extra easy. So if I say, oh, well, I want to go class 4 this particular raid, we could just do that. And then we just put on a bag and off we go. It makes it quite straightforward. We just have to get some extra ammo. So most of this usual stuff that maybe you'd forget to bring adrenaline, or maybe you'd forget, like you could save one with a grenade, for example. I mean, I'm going to add them in because it depends on what grenades I have at the time. I'm not buying these traditionally over and over again from the flea market, but you can set yourself up with some basic loadout and then just embellish it with the other things. It should cut down your loadout time by about 50%. So I hope that was useful and gave you guys a really sort of a high level consideration of like all the things you might want to think about why I piece together my loadouts the way I do. Obviously your loadouts are going to differ to mine. You're going to want different guns, different armor, different amounts of looting. I tend not to do very many loot runs. So for some people, they might want a really massive rig and then they're going to go to reserve and then go to a manhole. There's so much stuff that you could do in Tarkov. There is no right way to build your kits, but the way that they interlink, I think is quite interesting. And maybe my thought process would either have given you some more ideas about your own kits, or potentially you could just, use some of the ideas directly that I've shown you here that you may not have thought about already. So as usual, a big thank you to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.